Then we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the City of Tucson Planning Commission. My name is Lexi Wellett, and I am the chair of the Planning Commission. The responsibilities of this body are to advise the mayor and council and the Planning and Development Services Department on the adoption of long-range plans, policies, specific plans, and regulations that affect land use development. Will staff please call the roll?
Certainly. Commissioner Cassidy. Chair Wellett.
Present.
Commissioner Zagier. Commissioner Martin.
Here.
Commissioner Young.
Here.
Commissioner Schwartz.
Here.
Commissioner Small.
Present.
Commissioner Kenny.
Here.
Commissioner Lampo.
Present.
And Commissioner McCansey. All right, let the record reflect that a quorum is present.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Shrove.
Excuse me, Chair Willett, the carver didn't call my name.
Terribly sorry about that. Vice Chair Ortiz Epino.
I am here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carver, for that, and welcome to the new commissioner there down here to my right here. We're glad to have you, Commissioner Small.
Thank you.
So I'm going to call the next item number 2. It's approval of the legal action report for July 17th, 2024. The chair would entertain a motion for the approval.
I'll move approval of the action report.
We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Very good. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. Hearing none. Well, it looks like that motion passes there. So item number 3, which is a presentation on ADUs and the zoning timeline code amendments. Would staff please give their presentation on item number 3?
Yes, thank you, Chair Wellett. This evening's presentation is on a proposed code amendment relating to accessory dwelling units and zoning timelines within the city of Tucson. And okay, one moment. Next slide, please. So this proposed code amendment came out of a recent set of bills passed by the state legislature that address housing and zoning within the state of Arizona. 2 of these bills, which are highlighted in green here, House Bill 2720 and Senate Bill 1162, require some adjustments to our existing Unified Development Code. And in both of these cases, these adjustments must be effective by January 1st of 2025. So they are part of this code package, which is being brought before you this evening for the study session. So in terms of the updates, a little bit of background on our direction to proceed with this is that at the June 18th, 2024 meeting, Mayor and Council authorized staff to take the action necessary to begin to develop these code changes that came out of the bills. We determined that specific requirements for our zoning timelines and ADUs were necessary. And so we began to work on what specifically was required by the new regulations. So for Senate Bill 1162, this is the zoning timelines regulation. We noted that it requires municipalities over 30,000 people to adopt these regulations, as I mentioned, by January 1st. And some of the requirements in here are that administrative review must be complete within 30 days of receiving a complete application. Additionally, the municipality shall approve or deny the application within 180 days after determining that it's complete. Currently, the UDC requires that a zoning examiner's public hearing be held within 70 days of application completeness, and also for a concurrent plan amendment that goes up, or a rezoning that comes up to 180 days. We don't currently have a deadline for mayor and council to approve or deny the application. We do not anticipate significant issues with this requirement, as most rezonings already meet the time frame. We understand the importance of a timely review of rezoning requests, and we currently aim to get all rezoning requests to mayor and council as quickly as possible. So we don't see this as a significant change. It's really just codifying what is already our current practice. I also just want to note that a second provision of this bill requires that municipalities complete what's called a housing needs assessment every 5 years and submit an annual report to the Arizona Department of Housing Compliance. However, this section does not require any amendment to the code, so it's not being addressed as part of our discussion tonight. I just wanted to mention that because if you ever receive any questions, that is part of the act or the law. So our current zoning timeline requires that the zoning examiner legislative procedure applies to rezonings or a special exception for requiring mayor and council approval. So that's really where our procedure is currently codified. We require a zoning examiner public hearing within 70 days of application submittal, and concurrent plan amendment rezoning application deadlines is 180 days. I already mentioned some of this, but I just feel like for clarity. We currently do have a deadline for mayor and council approval, which is do not have a deadline for mayor and council approval. The only deadline is for mayor and council public hearing, and the current UDC procedure does not include a deadline for mayor and council to approve or deny any application. So based on this, our proposed zoning timeline code amendments include to amend the zoning examiner legislative procedure to establish that administrative reviews of zoning applications must be complete within 30 days of receiving an application. And that is, just to clarify, that is receiving the application. You're going to conduct that administrative review within 30 days. And if it's not complete, I want to go back and clarify that you will determine that within those 30 days. Staff will determine that. And then also establish that the city shall approve or deny a zoning application within 180 days of determining that the application is complete. Currently, we have the requirement that a zoning examiner public hearing must be held within 70 days. So we are generally within compliance of that unless the applicant decides that they are going to request an extension for whatever reason. We noted that in terms of the community engagement on these two changes, we feel that these are minor and generally administrative in nature. So we did not feel that it was necessary to do a large part of engagement for this. Our engagement was focused on the ADU amendment, which I'll get to in just a moment. Also, I wanted to note that SB 1162, excuse me, apologize, my notes just dropped and this just crashed. One moment, please. I wanted to note that SB 1162 requires that in terms of the notification process for protest areas for rezonings, that's generally your 400-foot area. The law requires that government-owned property for the protest areas be excluded under the new law. However, our UDC currently references ARS 9-462.04H, which provides the process for the review of approval protest. And so we feel that that adequately addresses this requirement. So no additional amendments to the UDC are required for that section. Just wanted to note that small component of these requirements. So that really just covers those relatively small amendments for the zoning timeline code amendment. And then we can move on to the accessory dwelling unit requirements. These came out of House Bill 2720, which established state standards for ADUs, which again, we must comply with by January 1st. These standards are applicable for cities of 75,000 people or greater, and notes that or requires that cities must adopt regulations to allow for ADUs. Since we already have standards in place for ADUs, we don't need to go through and adopt a full set of standards. However, the new state statute does require that some modifications be made to these existing standards. And again, if we fail to do that, all lots zoned for residential use in the municipality will be required to permit ADUs without limits. So that's the incentive for us to make sure that we get this ordinance through mayor and council and have it effective by January 1st of 2025, or else the city's going to lose its right to regulate ADUs and simply will be required to allow them. So in terms of our review and engagement of the ADU requirements, we identified the requirements and or looked at the requirements and identified areas where changes to the existing code most occur, and I'll get into that on the next slide. And we also sought community input on the proposed changes to the requirements. We conducted 2 community-wide listening sessions on July 23rd and 24th. Both of those were held virtually. One of them was held during the day and the other was held in the evening to ensure that we got as broad of participation as possible. And during those listening sessions, we got around 60 to 65 people at each of the listening sessions. So there was definitely some good response to holding them. So in terms of what the regulations require, this table shows what our current regulations have in place in areas where amendments are necessary and what we're proposing. The first one has to do with the number of ADUs allowed per lot. Currently, we allow one ADU per residential lot. The law will require us to amend that to allow 2 per lot, and in some cases, 3 or an additional ADU if the lot is over 1 acre in size and one of those ADUs is restricted to affordable housing. So generally 2, and in some cases 3. In terms of the size and how the maximum size of an ADU is calculated, currently it's based on lot size with an ADU being permitted, which is up to 10% of the lot size, up to a maximum of 1,000 square feet, with a 600 square foot ADU being allowed on any lot size. And so that is a case where even if you have a small lot, you could build up to a 650 square foot accessory dwelling unit. The new legislation requires that we calculate it based on the size of the primary structure instead of the size of the lot. And so it still has the 1,000 square foot maximum size for an ADU, but it would be up to 75% of the primary structure. So instead of looking at lot size, we're looking at how large that primary structure is on the lot to determine how much of an ADU you could construct. In terms of height, which is the third area where some changes are necessary, currently height is limited to 12 feet, or if the primary home is 2 stories, the height of the primary residence. And under the new law, the height limit follows that of a single family home within the same zone. Generally, that's 25 feet. And so there's no longer any connection to the height of the primary residence. It's simply what the requirement is within that zone has to be met. Parking, we're also seeing some changes. Currently, our parking regulations are 1 parking space required per ADU, but that can be waived if the site is a 1/4 mile from transit or bike facilities. So there's generally already some flexibility worked into it. However, under the new law, no additional parking may be required for the ADU. So that one additional space we will no longer be permitted to require. And then setbacks have some changes as well. Currently, setbacks is based on the existing zoning where the ADU would be located. They're generally 6 feet or 2/3 of the height of the structure. It's evaluated on a case-by-case basis. But under the new standards, the required rear and side setbacks are generally 5 feet. So a little bit of a change there certainly, and a real change in the way that they're calculated. Also, I wanted to note that ADUs currently require cool roofs, and that will be retained as part of this code update. There are a couple of other smaller areas within the code that this new set of requirements has an impact on, and a few areas that I just wanted to kind of go over a little bit for clarity's sake. First of all, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CCNRs. CCNRs are private agreements which the city does not administer or enforce. We're not a party to those agreements. That remains the same. And I wanted to clarify that the state bill does not supersede or restrict or prohibit restrictive covenants regarding ADUs. So that will continue. Additionally, there is the question about short-term rentals and regulation of short-term rentals. I want to note here that HB 2720 establishes how a city may regulate the short-term rental of ADUs, but the city may require a short-term rental to be owner-occupied. That's what it gives us authority to regulate. However, administering this requirement would be onerous and likely ineffective due to the following. First of all, such regulations would only become effective as of the date of adoption. Also, there would be a grace period of 3 years before enforcement could be required, and the regulations would only apply after a change of ownership. So these 3 items together result in there being little effective regulating short-term rentals under the provision. Otherwise, the regulation of short-term rentals is severely regulated by the state. The city does currently require that there be a business license for short-term rentals, and that requirement would stay in place. One other area where there are some impacts is under historic and neighborhood preservation. Historic review would still be required for any ADU that's proposed within a historic or neighborhood preservation zone, or which is a historic landmark. So that aspect of it is not changing. However, under the new law, an ADU cannot be required to match the exterior design, roof pitch, or finishing materials of the primary single-family dwelling that's specifically called out in the Act. So that's something where there is now a limitation on what can be done. However, historic preservation design standards still do apply, and ADUs will still be required to go through historic design review as applicable. State law does not change that. Also, I wanted to note that for National Register listed historic districts, they are not locally regulated, so they do not require that new development comply with any design standards or go through a design review process, and that's not changing as well. However, homeowners are encouraged to consult with the State Historic Preservation Office to ensure that their development complies with requirements, as there could be some significant tax ramifications. So that's an overview of what changes are being proposed and what other areas are being impacted. Oh, I got that. There are also, so I want to come back from there to community feedback that we received when we did those listening sessions that I mentioned at the beginning of this section. So we kind of heard the same thing several times on each of these. First of all is that people desire to address housing affordability through ADUs as part of the solution to housing affordability. They also noted questions about short-term rentals and what we could or could not do with regard to their regulation. There were also a lot of comments or questions about the impacts of ADUs on historic preservation zones, historic landmarks, National Register listed properties, all of those historically related sets of regulations. Then this also, we heard quite a bit, was the desire for new standards to be as flexible as possible instead of more restrictive. That was something that sort of ran through a lot of the feedback that we received. And then also there was one of the questions that we posed for the 2 additional ADUs being permitted was, would you like those, would people prefer that those buildings be both detached or perhaps detached or attached? So you would see an attached ADU, which is still a separate living quarters. It just may share a common wall. And people really that we communicated with prefer to allow both detached and attached ADUs, again, seeking to make these as flexible as possible. And so based on that, we are proposing the following code changes. Increase the maximum number of ADUs allowed per lot, the 1 to 2. I'm sorry. Guys, thank you. Change the way that the square footage for the ADU is calculated to align with the state regulations, moving from the lot size basis to the primary structure basis. Update building height allowed by zone to generally 25 feet, updating building setbacks to 5 feet, and removing the parking requirements. Do want to note that these proposed changes do not change any of our regulations regarding sleeping quarters, which are separate from an ADU, and that is still an option that people could choose, again, just to continue in the vein of keeping things as flexible as possible. At the same time as we were conducting our review, we found redundancies related to the existing 50% floor area requirement that's within the UDC. And so we're proposing removal of that standard as well, which you see in the red line ordinance in front of you. So based on all of this, staff recommends that the Planning Commission set an accessory dwelling unit regulations and timelines for zoning applications UDC amendment for a public hearing on September 24th of 2024. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shrew. Really nice presentation. So I'd like to open this up for any questions from the commission to staff. Anybody? Commissioner Martin?
I'm looking in the UDC now, I didn't find a definition for accessory dwelling unit. It's not accessory use, but I see the state has a definition. I don't know if that.
Yeah, Commissioner Martin, the definition I think is in 11, it's in section 11.3.4 or something of that sort. So there is a definition. They're slightly different, but they're pretty similar, and both do say may have a kitchen. So they align pretty similar.
I guess I looked under accessory and I looked under dwelling and I didn't find it, so I don't know where it's at. So.
Okay, we can definitely point that out to you. Yeah.
I have a question about principal building gets demolished. And I just kind of was thinking about on the way down here is now you have a building that I guess becomes the principal structure with reduced setbacks and not a lot of requirements. So it's just the random thought. So, but given it can only be 75% of the principal structure, you'd be going backwards to build a smaller unit and then a smaller unit if you, it's just the rabbit hole I got into, I guess. One other thing that I saw was in 1162, it talks about exceptions for historic buildings, I think. I can find that. I didn't close it.
Are you
Under the rezoning application, I think it was the last section. It says that those were exempted from requirements. I just closed it. So sorry.
Oh, okay. That is, yeah, that's correct. Thank you.
Lost it. Sorry about that. But I thought there was the application requirements accepted some of the historic structures. I didn't know if that should be in the code too.
We can definitely look into that to see whether that creates a conflict. We can definitely look into that to see if that actually creates a conflict between if there's a historic element to the rezoning and if we need to add in some clarifying
That
language
goes
for
to-
that.
Timing for the rezoning.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's all I had.
Thank you, Commissioner Martin. Commissioner Lampo, do you have something?
Yeah, and so during the last meeting, I asked what happens after 180 days? Something gets missed. Once the shot clock expires, 180 days, there's no approval, there's no denial, what happens?
Right.
Yeah, so the bill doesn't really address that.
Saw that. You can give a 30-day extension, it looks like.
So yeah,
So then what happens after that 30 days? I don't think that things would get lost or anything along those lines, but
Mhm.
after 180 days, there should probably be something that says, this is what happens.
Yeah, I mean,
Commissioner Lampo and Chair and Commission members, I think our understanding is some of these timeframes are going to be, there's kind of an expectation that cities will be reporting on these timeframes to the state legislature. So this would kind of set how many of your rezonings did meet the 180-day timeline, that will be something that cities, hasn't been set this year, but in the future will be asked to report to the state legislature. And actually, it's something that we can start reporting to our community almost right away. We've actually we've set up an online dashboard where we're reporting on review timeframes on many of our applications and permit types. So it's actually something we could hold ourselves accountable through online dashboards. I think that it also, is something that an applicant could use in elevating any issues in terms of their application. But we basically just wrote in the state requirements to the code.
And that was actually my next question. Were there any model local laws released for any of these bills that could help guide what the city does?
yes, Commissioner Lampo, we've been working with the Arizona League of Cities and Towns, and they've had model bills for the ADU ordinance. They've had model language for this as well.
Very nice. The last question I have, so it says regulations per HB 2720, number of ADUs allowed, 2 per lot, 1 attached and 1 detached. Third ADU allowed on sites of 1 acre or more. If 1 ADU is restricted affordable housing, could you explain what that means?
Yeah, so this is from the bill, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So basically what it's saying is, and you'll see in the language that we ended up basically being, I guess, silent on whether it's attached or detached. So we're allowing for, if you want to do 1 attached, 1 detached, or 2 detached, you're welcome to do so. Or you could potentially, I guess, do 2 attached. When it comes to the restricted portion, there's a definition of affordable housing in there. I believe it's 80% AMI. And it would be done via a deed restriction. And then there is a definition already in our code that matches that. So we just reference that.
So under 1 acre, how many ADUs are allowed?
2 ADUs.
Perfect.
Yep.
That's all I have. Thanks.
Of course.
Thank you, Commissioner Lampo. Commissioner Ortiz-Pino, and then we'll come down to you.
Thank you, Chair Willett. Just for follow-up and for my own understanding, it's my general understanding that if the city fails to approve after 180 days or 70 days for a zoning examiner hearing, that the case is approved based on not getting to it. Is that not the case?
That is not the case, no. As Corin was mentioning, I mean, it's definitely setting the expectation. We have timelines in a lot of our code related to this where it sets that expectation. We generally meet those timelines. Sometimes there are, circumstances that they wouldn't necessarily do so. But this sets the framework for how we would process them.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Small?
Thank you, Chair. I think I just need a clarification about the setbacks, because as I look at this, the slide that compares the current regulations in Tucson to the new regulations for HB 2720. It says required rear and side setbacks cannot be more than 5 feet from the property line, right? Which I interpret to be 5, 4, 3, 2, right on the property line. This other proposed code changes says update building setbacks 5 feet side and rear, which sort of indicates that it is 5 feet, right? So is there a variance or is it 5?
So basically what the bill does, it sets up 5 feet as that maximum. So the city could come in and say, we want it to be 2 feet or 1 feet or 3 feet. So we've stuck with that 5, but it couldn't be 6, it couldn't be 7,
Right.
it couldn't be anything more than that.
So
essentially.
it actually is the cannot be more than 5 feet from
That's
the
correct.
property line.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Smalls. Commissioner Kenny?
Yeah, thank you. So the HB 2720 is kind of inconsistent with itself regarding deed restrictions. So first it says that a third ADU is allowed if there's a restricted affordable dwelling unit, but then further down it says cities can't require restricted covenants. So, I think it's a potential issue that somebody could bring up if they want to cause trouble. Maybe a solution would be instead of a deed restriction, a development agreement or something, just avoid the issue. The other thing was, it says that, let's see, the language in 2720 is that the ADU restrictions can't be more restrictive than those for single-family dwellings in the same zoning area, which means that now detached ADUs are going to be allowed in front of primary dwellings if they can meet the single-family setbacks. Is that correct?
So we've been working on this quite a bit and working with the state, with the other municipalities in the state, as well as city attorney's office. And our interpretation is that building frontage is not necessarily related to the actual like setbacks from the front. So our interpretation is that it wouldn't be allowed in the front for this.
Okay. And then my only other comment was that on the 5-foot side and rear setback issue, we have in here that in the red lines, it says an ADU is required a minimum perimeter yard setback of 5 feet. I don't know if you wanted to clarify that perimeter yard is only side and rear. I know that, perimeter yard is defined and that does not include the front, but I don't know, it's just a suggestion maybe to add side and rear in there so that people see it and don't think that they can put something 5 feet from the street.
Great. Thank you. That's a good suggestion.
That's all I got.
Commissioner Martin?
I've found the section, now good. Under 964-946-210, C, it says this section does not apply to land that is designated as historic district of historic significance pursuant to, 946-201. I just thought that has to do with the timeline for approval, so it seemed like that exception should go into our code too, so.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Martin.
Thank you. Are there any other commissioners that would like to add to the discussion? All right, seeing no one jump to their mic here, with the completion.
One more quick question. However, you mentioned that ADUs would be required to prove that they have a cooling roof, I think was the term you used. Is that a measurement of albedo?
That is correct. That's a measure that's currently in effect as part of the existing ordinance, and that will remain. And that would be addressed during the building permitting process.
And still ADUs are the only use that requires an albedo measurement?
That
Okay,
is
I just
correct.
wanted to
Yeah,
bring that up.
answer your question. Yes, that is correct.
Thanks.
So with that, I am going to open this up for a motion to set the Planning Commission public hearing for accessory dwelling unit and zoning timeline UDC amendment on September 24th, 2024. May I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to set a, could you pull it up on screen? It just makes it so much easier. That way I'm hitting exactly. There we go. I will make a motion that the two amendments be scheduled for a public hearing on September 24th, 2024. And just to clarify, it's both of them are being heard at the same time.
That is correct. They're combined into a single ordinance, just addressing those two issues.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Lampo. May I have a second?
Second.
Very good. I have a motion and I have a second. All those in favor for setting the Planning Commission public hearing for September 24th, 2024, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Hearing none, motion passes. The public hearing for the UDC text amendments to address accessory dwelling units and zoning timeline is set for September 24th, 2024. That brings us to the next item, item number 4, PDSD staff announcements. Would staff please provide any updates to the commission?
Yeah, sure. Just give you a quick update on Plan Tucson, which will be back in front of you pretty soon. So we're currently moving into phase 3 of Plan Tucson. So we're finalizing the initial draft, the full draft of it. We'll be sharing that with the public in the next week or so, or a week or two. And then we're going to be doing some working meetings related to that on different sections and getting community feedback related to that. So moving into that next process, it's really exciting we'll have a full draft for everyone to get your feedback on. And then throughout the fall and kind of beginning of winter, we'll be getting that feedback and finalizing it to bring it to Planning Commission. We're looking to bring it back to you, I believe in February for a study session. So, yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Dan. Any other announcements? Nope. Very good. That brings us to item number 5, future agenda items. Would staff please provide the commission with the preview of the upcoming future agenda items?
Sure. Yeah. So we will have a public hearing on September 24th for these 2 items, this one item. And then additionally, we are working on our corridor redevelopment project, which we're kind of finalizing some language on, and we're going to do a little more public outreach, but that'll be in front of you for a study session in the next couple months or so.
Very good. Thank you. That brings, yeah.
For a long time, the commission's been discussing how many votes it takes to recommend something to mayor and council. And I don't know if we're getting a fuller commission, but we've had trouble with the 7 votes, so I don't know if there's been any more consideration about the majority of the commissioners at the meeting, or
No,
I mean, we
Commissioner.
talked about that for a long, long time, so.
Yeah, Commissioner Martin, that's a really good point and something that has come up. We would, obviously it would be, guided by mayor and council to make that change, but is something that we can definitely, discuss with mayor and council and bring it up to them. We are working on getting additional members and planning commissioners. We've been advertising it in our newsletter. We send it out to Newsnet as well, and working to get those additional seats filled. We know it's been challenging to get quorums, but hopefully in the next month or 2, we'll have those remaining seats filled. So we won't have quite as many issues related to that. Yeah.
Thank you. So that brings us to item number 6, call to the audience. So item number 6, or at this time, I'd like to offer the public an opportunity to speak on any subject that is not listed on the current agenda as a public hearing. If anyone would like to speak, please raise their hand to let us know or to speak. Oh, looks like we've got somebody online. Valerie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm sorry, you just said not to speak about anything that was on tonight's agenda. Does that mean I can't speak about ADUs?
So it's only to not speak on anything that's a public hearing. So there's no public hearings tonight. You're free to speak about ADUs.
Thank you. I just have a short list and I promise I won't derail anything you guys have done. I just want to commend you for all the hard work. I think that this, I read through all the changes in detail last night and they look really good. Some of you may know me, I own the urban infill project, and so I've got pre-permitted plans on the Casita Library. I've sold 17 floor plans in the city so far in just 1 year. So I come with like some perspective from the public and also with some realities of working with the code. And so I just want to bring up a few points. One, the first couple are in light that I know that there's another heavy lift coming in terms of infill development. And so small changes now could make that easier in the future. So one thing is a conversation around the ability for people to sell ADUs. And that I realize is a much larger conversation, and it's happening in other states, California and Oregon, I believe, where they're able to condoize properties so that homeowners can build an ADU and then sell it. Okay, and then the second thing I'd like to bring up, I've heard some comments from the public in terms of eliminating the term sleeping quarters from the zoning code as we legalize and free up the ability to build ADUs. And I would like to just bring to your attention the very important distinction between an ADU and a sleeping quarter. Not only is it the presence of a kitchen, but also the impact fees that you have to pay for an ADU. So those impact fees are very extreme for a lot of homeowners and have become a barrier. So giving people an option to continue to build a sleeping quarters when they need extra space is very important to remove a barrier for many people. Unless, of course, we could have the conversation about eliminating impact fees for ADUs or second dwellings on a single site. Okay, third, the threshold for requiring a development package right now in the city is 3 units. And I know that you've changed in the red lines, you've changed that for ADUs, which I think is a very progressive step forward. And I really appreciate that. It's going to save a lot in terms of the time to review these projects. I think that it would be beneficial to make that change across the whole zoning code. By pushing the number from 3 to 5 would put you in line with the banking and lending industry in what defines a commercial project. And Pima County has recently made the same administrative change and pushed their number up to 5 units. People are using the model plans for various purposes outside of ADUs as well. And so when people are trying to just build 4 units, they're functioning very similarly to a main house and an ADU, and it's going through the DP process is a very big barrier, time and money for people. So I would like to encourage you to think about that change, not just affecting the ADU code. There is another comment that goes around town about the aesthetic nature of some developers and building ADUs and maybe just putting gravel in the yard. So there's an aesthetic problem with this, and also we could talk about heat island effect from this kind of decision. So it would be nice to be more proactive and solutions-based oriented and think about requiring, say, 1 tree plus 1 retention basin for every additional unit. That would help some of the aesthetic and heat island issues. And also we're requiring in new construction a gray water feature from the washing machine. So having a retention basin and a tree for every new unit would be a possible way to deter some of the lesser practices in town. I would like to just address for a moment in practice, allowing ADUs in the front. Most properties don't allow for that to happen, and those that do have the space, what would probably happen is the front new construction would become the main house and the back house would become the ADU if it meets all the size requirements, which most of the time they do. We very seldom have situations where people have a larger side yards and they want their ADU to come meet the front of the house, but it doesn't sound like that's restricted in the current new language. Anyway, so I think in practice, having ADUs in the front yards is not really an issue. The other thing is, I mentioned model plans really do help the city keep their timelines quick. And so this kind of speaks to the development package process, where if we have model plans, a robust library of model plans, and a very standardized site review process that does not require the additional steps of the DP, that also will help the city be more efficient and keep their timelines under the 180 days, which we haven't really seen. I mean, there's a couple instances where we got that close to 180 days, but generally not. And then I see an opportunity potentially when you're talking about affordability and monitoring that via a deed restriction. From the public's perception, they want to have units that they can offer to people at affordable prices. I think that they want, people generally want to be able to do that. They're trying to rent these units out to somebody who's going to live very close to them. So they're being mindful about who's going to live there. And the bigger barrier right now is the cost of construction and keeping those costs down. So if the city had a way to potentially create a financial subsidy for construction, that would be one way that people would guarantee to keep their rental prices down for some time if it was a stipulation of a grant, perhaps, that was available to people. I'll also touch just for a moment, the short-term rental is something that people get very heated about because they hear stories from smaller towns and everything's ruined from too many Airbnb listings. I own a triplex and have several people in my life who own units that they've had on Airbnb, and Airbnb and short-term rentals are getting less and less lucrative by the day. I actually don't anticipate short-term rentals are going to be a thing that ruin neighborhoods necessarily. I think people want a more stable environment on their lots when we're doing this kind of work. So I don't see it as being as big a problem as some people think. And lastly, now that we're going to have to allow 2-story dwelling units to go in behind 1-story houses, this is going to change the landscape of our R1 neighborhoods quite a lot. And I think the biggest problem that people have is with privacy. So it could be that if they're building a 2-story unit surrounded by 1-story existing homes, there could be a requirement to include privacy mitigations such as horizontal upturned louvers to block the view into people's backyards, or even we did one in the Broadmoor Village neighborhood and put frosted glass in all the upstairs windows, again, to mitigate privacy for the neighbors. We could even take this one step further. It might affect the setback requirements. I'm not sure, we'd have to look a little further into it, but You could require a solar study with a two-story building to be able to preserve winter sun accessibility to the neighbors. And that would be a really nice way to talk about environmental quality and quality of space and access to daylight and fresh air when we start to build like this tight.
Very good, Miss Lane. I really appreciate your comments here and insight. Do you have much more, or are you wrapping up?
I reached the only thing the last thing I was gonna say was that I'm really glad to see that you eliminated the on-site parking requirements. That's a very progressive and good step forward also. So maybe some incentives for bicycle locking mechanisms or bicycle parking on people's properties would be another opportunity. But that is all, and I appreciate your time and thank you so much for listening.
Yes, thank you for your insight. We really appreciate you hopping on the call this evening and look forward to hearing some more about this in the future. So thank you. With that, are there any other members of the public that would like to speak? All right, seeing no one in the audience raise their hands or come up, the chair would entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Very good. It sounds like I got a motion and a second. So thank you all for being here this evening. And it's nice to have Commissioner Small here with us. So thank you all so much, and we'll see you on the 24th.
Great. Thanks, everyone.